Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome to this edition of Illinois Rising. Dan Proft. I'm a co-host of Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, Monday to Friday, 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. with Amy Jacobson. And joining me on this installment of Illinois Rising is Pat Hughes, co-founder of the Illinois Opportunity Project. And Pat, Tiny Dancer has come up with another bit of political theater where he appears to be doing something without actually really doing anything to just try and win each individual press day. That's what he's trying to do as he gears up for his reelection in 2019, which is just a little over a year and a half away. And as I've said on this show and the morning show that I do, I'm telling you right now, if he wins reelection in 2019, he's running for president of the United States in 2020. So we'll see. But his latest gambit to try and get a little decent press is a plan to require every CPS student to show an acceptance letter to a four-year university, a community college, trade school, or apprenticeship, or internship, or branch of the armed services in order to receive their high school diploma, a diploma that is functionally worthless in most of the city.
Yeah, it is functionally worthless. You know, Dan, this is just going to drive graduation rates down. What they should be focusing on, I'm sure our next guest will comment, is on the structural failure of CPS and the fact that they don't graduate anyone or educate anyone. And that's why, like you said, this is just a theater covering up what is obviously a failed system.
Well, they graduate kids, but they graduate them to what end? I mean, the Chicago Consortium on School Research finds that 1 in 7 CPS freshmen in school today will get a bachelor's degree by the age of 25. 1 in 7 in a system of 350,000 kids. And here's the question, of course, is, well, what's behind this? It's not Rahm Emanuel's concern for improving the quality of CPS. He's had 6 years to do that. He's demonstrated he's not interested. So what's the real play here? I think the real play is cash for city colleges and places like Chicago State, where a disproportionate share of the small percentage of CPS kids actually going on to post-secondary education are going to wind up. For example, Chicago State, which the most recent study we did at ChicagoCitywire.com, 11% of students that entered in 2009 graduated by 2015, 11%, $2.5 million per year per graduate. And Chicago State, just using that as an example, receives 40% of its budget from the federal government. So you need more students to get more of the subsidies associated with students. That's called student loans. And to keep these institutions going. Institutions, 11% at Chicago State. Graduation rates at the city colleges are awful as well. So it's schools that aren't performing at the next level as well, the post-secondary level, but that are cash-strapped because they've got to finance all of these wonderful salaries for the adults in the institutions, the same thing that's done at the secondary level and the primary level in Chicago. So that's the game to me. But for more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Bethany Mandel. She is a senior contributor to the Federalist, thefederalist.com, and a freelance writer. Bethany, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Bethany?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate that. So your disposition towards this proposal from Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel, what do you like or dislike about it? And if you're not a proponent, why is that?
I think it's pretty ridiculous. I think it's one thing to think that people should have a plan for after they graduate in some capacity. But what really sort of goads me is that the government is basically holding these well-earned degrees hostage for their own whims. You can think that people should have a plan for after graduation, but to force them to prove it by withholding a degree that they've earned, to me, is just the epitome of unfairness.
Yeah, and Bethany, for my mind, it's a little bit of sort of like maneuvering around the problem. To me, if you're educating these kids correctly, if they're being influenced correctly, if the structure of the educational system and everything around it, the support system and whatever is at CPS is for the student, you wouldn't need to have a ridiculous policy like this, because the structure of the everyday would lead these kids to a path of saying, this is what I'm going to do post-graduation from high school. So clearly that's failed. And so now they're trying to put a Band-Aid on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, and what the mayor said was basically, the education that we're providing in the public schools isn't sufficient. So now we need to force students to go into college or some sort of trade program or whatever, which is fine, but perhaps instead of forcing them to go into another school, you fix the schools that we're already paying for.
Well, isn't this
that would be a good first step?
Yeah, this is sort of reminiscent of what Rahm Emanuel's old boss, President Obama, did for much of his presidency. I have decreed something, so shall it be. So I've decreed that all these children in CPS are going to pursue one of the paths I've offered, and so that's just how it's going to happen. Yeah, and there's people aren't allowed to have any agency. The government is just taking the agency away from 18-year-olds who, by the way, like you don't really you don't know what's going on in other people's homes. There's people who might have children of their own, or who might need to go to work and work for a few years. There's so many scenarios in which having a plan that involves a letter of some sort to prove to the public school system doesn't work, and you can't withhold someone's degree for that. Well, right, and the other thing too is if I can't get into a four-year university other than for perhaps some of the city colleges, the open enrollment community colleges, or a Chicago State that is effectively the same thing, even though it's technically a four-year university, then this is a way also to blame shift away from CPS. To your point about CPS not getting the job done, well, the way we blame shift is say, look, all the kids are getting this certificate, this acceptance letter, or this acceptance from a post-secondary education institution, or from a vocational program, or they're entering the armed services. So we've taken care of all our kids. We did our job at the K through 12 level, just papering over all the structural infirmities in big urban school systems like Chicago.
Yeah, absolutely. And the sort of frustrating part to me is that it doesn't at all account for sort of unconventional situations where there's just as much education happening post graduation. So one of the exemptions that they have is if you have an apprenticeship. But okay, that's a formal apprenticeship. But I have a cousin who now makes triple what I make, and he, after high school, I don't even know if he graduated high school, he became an apprentice of sorts, an informal apprentice of a local plumber. And then he started his own plumbing business with all of the expertise that he got. And he wasn't granted a letter by his boss. He just went to work as a plumber and learned everything that his boss would teach him. And then he was able to start his own very successful business in Arizona. And he has all of the cousins who all of us have degrees, and some of us have advanced degrees. He makes the most.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, plus Bethany and Dan, this is abject silliness, right? Because I can get a letter from Chicago State that says, hey, yeah, I'm going to Chicago State next year, and I can present that for graduation and then just not go. So this is just this is papering over a requirement that you could meet and never actually do the thing it's purporting to do. Now, unless you join the military, then you have to go. But everything else, you can just get a letter. You get a letter from an apprenticeship. You could start the apprenticeship for a day and quit. It's all silliness.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. And the sort of frustrating part is Emanuel is using the fact that this further education is necessary because so many students are going into remedial math classes or English classes or whatnot in community colleges and in four-year colleges. That sort of speaks to the education that they're getting in Chicago. And that's not just in Chicago, that's across the board.
Right, we're paying for your high school education twice.
Yeah.
She is Bethany Mandel, senior contributor to the Federalist, thefederalist.com, also a freelance writer. Bethany, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.